Hello, and thank you for joining us for the First Presbyterian Safe Sanctuaries training. This training video is intended especially for weekday school teachers and leaders. We want to start off by saying thank you for being part of our school. First Presbyterian Weekday School has an excellent reputation in our community as being a quality provider of early childhood education. We attribute that most essentially to our staff, so we thank you for being part of that. So what is safe sanctuaries? We hear that term often. Sometimes you might also hear the term child protection. But either of these terms are a series of guidelines, policies, and procedures initiated and implemented in order to provide and create and maintain a safe environment for children, youth, and the leaders who work with them. And so why do we do it? Why safe sanctuaries? Well, we say that it is our calling and our mandate to ensure safety for all God's people. And so that is part of that is reducing the risk of abuse occurring in our facility as we're part of our programs at First Presbyterian. We also say that an essential part of that is to protect workers and volunteers from false accusations or suspicions. Our training is kind of twofold. The first part, and really the most significant part for our weekday school leaders, is to recognize the warning signs for abuse and then knowing how to report it and what to do with suspicions that you might have, whether it's occurring, somehow as part of our weekday school ministry, or maybe more likely that it would be occurring in the life of a child outside of our school or church. The second phase of our training talks specifically about the procedures that we have at First Presbyterian to maintain safety for students, to assure that false accusations are not made. So knowing, following, and upholding the procedures that we have. We really think it is key for our weekday school leaders to recognize signs of abuse and to know, how to report that. Our school is a safe place. It is a place where children have a network of love and of trust, and they have that within our church walls, within our school walls. It is very important that we're prepared to know how to handle certain information like this, because leaders working closely with children may be some of the first to notice warning signs that give us reason to suspect some sort of abuse. So it is actually true that teachers are the largest category of people who report abuse. And that speaks to just the role of a teacher, the role of those who lovingly work closely with children, that you notice things, and you notice when there's changes in behavior, and you notice when there's physical signs or emotional signs that might be contributing to possibility of abuse. So we want to prepare you. We have a video to share with you that will kind of give you some ideas of how these things can manifest themselves and what you can be on the lookout for. It's hard stuff as we think about children in our midst that may be experiencing very difficult life situations. But we believe the information contained in the following video will be very helpful to you as an educator.
Your job has so many functions. To provide care, to enlighten with knowledge and understanding, to ensure good health. Every day there are signs, some obvious, some hidden, that a child in your care is being physically or sexually abused or neglected. When you learn to recognize the signs of child abuse and neglect and respond appropriately, you will become an integral part of a community determined to strengthen families by preventing abuse and neglect of children in Virginia.
It's important that we recognize the family in all of this, that we want the family to continue, and mandatory reporting is not an effort to always break up families. It's an effort to recognize problems within families and to recognize the need to move on. So we need teachers to be part of that full circle. They're involved with the child part of the day, and then other care providers are involved the rest of the day, and then they usually go home to their parents. So we have to have a full circle of individuals around that child, and everyone in that circle has to be able to recognize abuse and neglect signs.
Your help is required by law. A look around the Commonwealth shows the value of your compliance with the law. The Virginia Department of Social Services reports that across the state, nearly 9,000 children were found to be the victims of at least one form of abuse or neglect in just 1 year. Not only does the abuse cross cultural and economic lines, it also occurs outside of the family, in institutions and places that many families trust to look out for the well-being of their children. The most predominant type of child abuse is neglect, followed by physical and sexual abuse. Some children were also the victims of emotional maltreatment and medical neglect. 31 children in Virginia died as a result of abuse or neglect by their parents or caretakers. As a professional who is responsible for providing care to children, you are required by Virginia law to immediately report suspicions of abuse and neglect to your local Department of Social Services or the Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline. This law covers professionals who work in a large variety of programs where children are provided with services and care.
Nancy, she knows how to help children when things like this happen.
Good morning. This is Kathy Price. I'm the school nurse at Smith Elementary in Fair Lake.
When you make a good faith effort at reporting suspected child abuse and neglect, you are immune from liability, and your name will be kept confidential. To effectively follow this law, it's important to have a clear understanding of the different types of child abuse and neglect that occur. Neglect can be the result of the family's current status. A major family crisis, job loss, or serious illness can oftentimes mean the depletion of adequate care. Or it can be a continuation of a cycle of neglect that has occurred for generations. Younger children are at greater risk of neglect due to their own inability to meet basic survival needs. Children of parents who are substance abusers are also at increased risk.
When a child is neglected, it damages their self-esteem because basically what the message that is conveyed to that child is you don't matter, you're not important. As a result, these children have difficulty with relationships and difficulty with attachment. They are also at risk of sexual abuse because often these children are so hungry for attention from others that they are not able to say no to inappropriate requests.
Defining physical abuse is a matter of drawing the line between corporal punishment and the kind of punishment that causes injury. Physical abuse most often occurs when an adult is angry or frustrated and strikes a child, resulting in injury. It is not uncommon for people to confuse discipline with abuse.
The state doesn't want to interfere with a parent's rights to discipline their children. We all have that right. But in reference to a child having the right to be free from harm and injuries, that's where we have, it's a thin line, but we have to draw that line in reference to trying to offer children the same protection that we have as adults.
Perhaps the most disturbing form of child abuse is sexual abuse. Too many children in Virginia are victims of acts of sexual abuse. These acts violate a child's most basic need for emotional and physical safety. It is as if they are prisoners in their own family, neighborhood, school, or church.
Children who have been sexually abused have been robbed of their childhood innocence, often by a trusted adult. Their loyalty, trust in the relationship with that adult has been manipulated for the adult's own personal gratification.
Other children are victims of emotional maltreatment, while still others are born after having been exposed to drugs or alcohol during pregnancy. Such treatment is identified in Virginia's child abuse and neglect laws. Because abuse and neglect can be passed from generation to generation, it is even more vital that you understand how to recognize the warning signs and begin the important task of preventing abuse and neglect from being passed down to new generations of children.
There's a thin line between poverty and neglect, and we have to keep that in mind when we're working with families, because poverty looks just like neglect. And that requires our caretakers, our teachers, our nurses to have some working knowledge of the family in regard to just where they are economically. And if you're able to make that distinction, then you're in a better position to know when a family is just dealing at the best level they can, and when there's truly an issue where a child is going without because of neglect.
The signs of neglect: consistent hunger, poor hygiene, lack of supervision, and unattended healthcare needs are a call to action on your part. When you speak with a child about your observations, or if a child tells you about the possibility of neglect in her family, these general guidelines will help ensure that the conversation is handled sensitively, thereby creating a sense of security for that child.
So, Brittany, can you tell me why you came to see me today?
Mrs. White told me to come see you because I can't see the blackboard.
Okay. You're looking at the crackers. Did you want the crackers? Are you hungry? Okay. You can have the crackers. Here you go. Did you have breakfast this morning? No. Well, it's almost lunchtime now. Did you bring lunch?
Sometimes my friends share their lunch with me.
They do. When was the last time you ate?
My sister cooked spaghetti last night.
Really? Okay. Where was your mom?
Asleep. I can cook too.
Really? What do you cook?
I can cook spaghetti and bologna.
Wow. All by yourself? You must be very proud of yourself. Do you dress yourself? Did you dress yourself this morning? You did? You are very responsible, Brittany. Tell me, did you take a bath this morning?
I don't know.
No? When was the last time you had a bath?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, who made sure that you got to school today?
I did.
Really? All by yourself again? Where was your mom?
She was asleep.
She was.
Between your observations and your conversation with the child, you should be able to determine if there is suspicion of neglect. A child's statements will often help to clarify your suspicions.
Do you have a regular doctor who you see when you don't feel well? Okay. Brittany, I am really glad you came to see me today. And you know what we're going to do? We are finally going to do that eye exam, okay? So we're going to do that. And then why don't you and I go get some lunch?
These answers are indicative of a child who may be a victim of neglect. Physical abuse can be well hidden by fearful lies and hits to the areas of the body not revealed by clothing. But if you have a child in your care who reports pain or has injuries, there are ways to determine if the injury or pain is a result of accidental injury or physical abuse.
There's no doubt that children are very active, and after the age of 1 have great gross motor skills that can get them into a lot of trouble out on a playground or even in household play. And there are studies out in the literature that show that the average 3-year-old has 12 bruises on their body at any one given point of time. So how do we discern the difference between inflicted injury versus accidental injury? There are several elements of the injury that help you identify whether it was inflicted or accidental.
Inflicted injuries will be evident in scars that look far different than the accidental fall off a bike or scraped knee. Accidental injuries most often occur on the bony parts of the body: knees, elbows, shins, or forehead. Inflicted injuries affect the soft or hidden parts of a body: the back, thighs, buttocks, and the back of the legs. The greater the number of injuries, the greater the cause for concern. Unless a child is involved in a serious accident, that child is unlikely to sustain multiple injuries. Multiple injuries in different stages of healing may indicate abuse. Abusive injuries are often inflicted with familiar objects, such as a belt, stick, and paddle. The resulting marks often bear a strong resemblance to the instrument that was used. Accidental injuries resulting from bumps and falls usually have no defined shape. If an injury is accidental, there should be a reasonable explanation of how it happened that is consistent with the appearance of the injury. When the injury and the explanation are inconsistent, there is cause for concern. These photographs are of children who have had injuries inflicted by their parents or caretakers.
There is frequently an expectation from the caretaker that their developmental level is much higher than their age. So they expect them to get this activity done in a fashion similar to an adult, that it shouldn't be a task to be able to eat, and it shouldn't be a task to be able to get dressed. So when the caretaker loses patience with this aged child, The child is frequently grabbed around the upper part of the arm, around the forearm, frequently around the face. You'll find oval matching marks over either jawline from being forced to eat at a faster rate or forced to brush their teeth at a faster rate. When you look at this picture, there are more than a dozen bruises that have been incurred to this right lower extremity area. And these bruises are not all of the same age. They're in different stages of healing, and that can be determined by the fact that they're different in coloration. This location is not a bony prominence area on this child. It is mostly soft tissue. It would be unusual for this child to have a couple of bruises in this area, much less the greater than 12 bruises that we see. Loop marks are inflicted by a variety of instruments: Venetian blind cords, ropes, electrical cords, belts, so common household items that are used to hit the child. This picture shows us an example of classic switch marks. The location of these marks is across this child's buttocks. The child that we're seeing here actually was still diaper dependent, so the diaper needed to have been taken off for these marks to be inflicted. The explanation that was offered for these marks when this child was examined was actually that it was a diaper rash. A daycare worker is actually who identified the lesions and spoke to social services about it because of her concern that it was not consistent with the diaper rash. And ligature marks simply represent an area in which a child was bound or tied and left somewhere for a protracted period of time. With that child being bound, it is most frequently by a rope. It can be by other forms of restraints like handcuffs. With the child moving against that restraint, usually what occurs is breakdown and rubbing of the skin so that the injury that is left is similar to a rope burn mark.
Behavior can also tell a significant story. A child who is being physically abused may be apprehensive when other children cry, recoil from fast movement by a parent, caretaker, or other adults, be reluctant or afraid to go home. The same conversational guidelines used when talking with a child about suspected neglect can also be used when talking with a child about suspected physical abuse.
With most people, you just want to first get to know the child. You just want to ask him some general questions about his name, where he lives, who he lives with. Does he have any sisters or brothers? Are they older? Are they younger? Who's his favorite teacher? You just kind of get them to feel comfortable with you. And then you use a little bit of yourself. You tell them who you are, that I've been asked to come out to talk with you, and you identified the teacher or the principal, someone that they really know, and that's my friend, and we just needed to talk to you about something. And then you begin to engage them into whatever the issues are.
This will help you learn more about feelings the child may be holding inside. Feelings that may be a sign of any type of abuse or neglect.
Is this where you bumped it? Wow, buddy. That looks awful sore. Is that hurting you? What happened?
I don't know.
You're not sure?
Mm-mm.
How did that happen?
I don't know. Maybe when I fell down or
When did you fall down?
when I was at my house.
Buddy, that looks sore. Does it hurt?
Mm-mm.
I don't think you did that bumping into the shelf, do you? How did it happen?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
I think I broke the rules or something.
You broke the rules. Has anybody else ever hit you like this? No. It must really hurt, huh? Have you told anybody else about this? No? Why haven't you told anybody? That looks like it's really sore.
Because my dad said if I told anybody, he would hit me even harder.
I think we should probably talk to Miss Nancy. She knows how to help children when things like this happen. Would that be okay? Okay.
The child may be fearful or apprehensive, so it's important not to press for details that they are unable or unwilling to give. Building trust and showing support may be the first step in helping ensure the safety of that child. Neglect and physical abuse show their signs in far more obvious ways than sexual abuse. So often, when a child is sexually abused, the emotional scars, like the secretive nature of the act, are hidden. Those scars, however, can last a lifetime. Your responsibility is to recognize the patterns of behavior that are manifest in a child who is being sexually abused. A child who is living a life of sexual abuse is living a life of fear. Sexual abuse can have disastrous effects on that child's development. Sexually abused children can acquire sexually transmitted diseases or become pregnant. Their academic success can be stilted from a lack of concentration. Many sexually abused kids wind up having a difficult time trusting others and suffer from shame and guilt, even believing the abuse was their fault. But you can have a positive effect on that child by recognizing the signs of sexual abuse.
It's vital because teachers, especially daycare providers, are with children all day long. They are the key folks who know if something is different as recognized in the child's behavior or academic performance. They are your first identifiers. So they're in a good position to report any their suspicions to Child Protective Services. Finally, we can't act until someone calls us.
In some cases, a sexually abused child may have detailed knowledge of sexual behavior that is inappropriate for his or her age. A child may create sexually explicit drawings. The type of play a child has with either peers or toys may sometimes be sexual in nature. A child may no longer like or want to be with a particular person or go to a specific place. The child's academic performance may deteriorate. The child may have sudden, noticeable behavior changes, such as mood swings or withdrawal from social situations. A child may be excessively concerned about sexual identity or homosexuality. The child may be seeking escape from a situation in which they feel powerless and unsafe. These behaviors are indicators that a child may be sexually abused. Talking about this with a young boy or girl can be quite difficult. Many children will find it quite difficult to acknowledge the fact that they've been sexually abused.
Children who are sexually abused are often very ashamed of what has happened to them. They often feel that it's their fault that they've been victimized. Often what we'll find is perpetrators will manipulate them into believing that they caused the abuse. They will also threaten them subtly by saying things like, "Your mother won't love you anymore if you tell. Bad things will happen to you and your family if you tell." Again, what the adult is doing is they're manipulating the child into believing that the abuse was their fault and that they will be held accountable for what has happened to them, when in fact the abuse is never the child's fault. It's always the fault of the adult involved in the act.
The secrecy, shame, and guilt associated with sexual abuse make it difficult for a child to discuss his or her situation. Respect the need for privacy by talking in a location where there are no interruptions. Sit near the child and touch him or her only with permission. Be alert for indirect statements alluding to the abuse.
I just don't feel good.
You just don't feel good. Is anything happening at home? Is your mom and your dad okay?
Yes.
They're fine. How about your little brother?
He's fine. Most of the time a babysitter's there.
The babysitter's here? Who's the babysitter?
Mr. Casey.
Mr. Casey? I don't know Mr. Casey. Who's Mr. Casey?
A friend of the family.
He's a friend of the family? Have you known him a long time?
Yes.
Okay. Does he come often?
Yes.
He does? You seem a little upset. Is there something you want to tell me?
Because he won't leave me alone.
He won't leave you alone? I don't understand. What do you mean he won't leave you alone?
He just keeps bothering me.
He bothers you? How?
He just won't leave me alone.
He won't leave you alone? How won't he leave you alone?
He just keeps touching me and he won't leave me alone.
The types of statements you just heard and the behaviors we described are consistent with children who have been sexually abused. They are cause for suspicion.
And her sister at 10 puts her to bed.
You play a critical role in ensuring the safety of a child whom you suspect may be a victim of abuse or neglect. When your observations and a child's statements have created a basis for suspicion in your mind, it is time for you to act. You have two reporting options. You can report to your local social services department during normal business hours, or you can call the toll-free Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline 24 hours a day. Keep in mind that you do not have to prove abuse or neglect, only suspect it. Reporting is not at your discretion. Remember, it is the law and your duty to immediately report your suspicions. Child Protective Services cannot act until you make a report. Failure to report is a Class 3 misdemeanor. Remember, you are not acting as an investigator. When you report your suspicions to Child Protective Services, you are fulfilling an important responsibility as part of a community of people who want to ensure that all children live healthy and safe lives.
Child Protective Services, may I help you?
I'm just calling to report a situation that is a little concerning to me, and I just want to talk to you about it and see if there's something we can do for a little girl, one of our students here.
Yes.
She's unkempt. Her hair's a mess. Her clothes are dirty. She has hygiene problems, I would say, and she's dressed inappropriately for the weather.
Right.
She says that she dresses herself in the morning because her mother's asleep. She also says that she cooks by herself. Sometimes her sister cooks, and her sister's only 10. And her sister at 10 puts her to bed. And the mother apparently, again, is either sleeping or, according to the little one, her name is Brittany, her mother's at work or at the store. So I'm concerned that the two are home alone and that they are not being adequately supervised, and I just wanted to report that.
Talk to me in reference to what type of health problems is this child having?
Well, this was the second time that she's been sent from her classroom because of complaints that she couldn't see the blackboard. And I remember her from last year, and I remember that she was sent to me last year, and she was supposed to go see a doctor. I sent a note home with her mother so that she could see a doctor and possibly have an eye exam and maybe get glasses, and I never got a response on that note. And then she was back today, and again, the report is that she can't see, the blackboard.
Well, ma'am, we can take this report, and what we'll do is we'll assign it to one of the investigators here, and you can expect them, more likely they'll come to the school to actually speak to both children in reference to what's going on. So you may want to let her teacher know that you can expect someone from Child Protective Services to come out to speak to the children. Then from there, we will proceed to go to the home and make contact with the parents. Now, sometimes parents can react by saying, what gave you the right to go to the school, talk to my children? That's by state policy. We have that right to do. They may start playing, well, who told you this? We, by law, do not release that information. They may still come to the school, may want to make some inquiry as to who may have called. The thing that covers all school personnel is that you are mandated reporters. And basically, when children are presented with any type of issues, you're just making a report. You're not making conclusions about anything. You're just saying you have concerns. You just feel that needs to be followed.
There are many things we can do as professionals or simply as adults who care to help the children we know and their families.
So often, we don't understand the signs. If you've grown up in a home free from abuse and neglect, you don't recognize the signs of abuse and neglect. And training is very important. Whether it's absenteeism, whether it's bruises, whether it's other injuries that are unexplained, we need to be able to recognize abuse and neglect.
By meeting your obligations under the law, you may be the one person in that child's life who makes a difference. You can start by listening to them with your eyes, ears, and your heart.
A few key things that I wanted to highlight just following that video. If a child begins to tell you about abuse, there can be some very important things, and the video covered some that we do and things that we don't do if we find ourselves interacting with the child about those sorts of situations. The key thing that we can do that I always want to remind people of is to take some time immediately after that interaction to make accurate notes, writing down all of the child's words, as they said them, so that you can, have that documented for your own reference, perhaps as things, progress along through the process. If it takes a little bit of time before we get that written down, or if we always think that we'll just remember it, by the time that we're ready to call on that information, sometimes it can be a little muddy as to what was actually said and to what we assumed. So wanting to make accurate notes of the child's exact words can be very helpful. One thing, especially that I want to highlight that we don't do, we don't ask leading questions. And so we always want to give the child an opportunity in their own words to share, what the situation is, maybe what has occurred, not wanting to put those words, in their mouths, especially with, as you work with preschoolers, the likelihood of you saying, well, did this happen? And them just saying yes is very high, maybe regardless of whether that actually happened or not. So when we hear the quote of the child about how they would describe what happened, that's much more valuable than them just agreeing with what, words we've, kind of placed in their thoughts. As a weekday school leader, you do indeed have a legal responsibility to report. You are considered a mandatory reporter in Virginia as a preschool teacher. So the legal requirement of that is that from your first interaction where you have a suspicion of abuse, of course you use your judgment, because there are some things that if it's an injury that looks like a child injury, the explanation lines up with something that makes sense to you, that it does not seem like an abusive situation, you don't need to report that because you don't think the child is being abused. But if you think that, you do have a suspicion that a child is being neglected or abused, you have 24 hours to report that information. So that's really, you don't have time to go home and think it over, that you want to act very quickly. We say that, so not only is this, a requirement of the law, but also a moral obligation, as we seek to care for the children, placed in our classrooms, placed in our midst. We want to be good stewards of the responsibility that we have in working with them to ensure their safety, and we want to do that quickly. So a legal and moral obligation to report. So what do I do? A child has shared something, or I have seen, marks on a child, or some, piece of information has given me reason to suspect an abusive or neglectful situation. Any allegation of child abuse, whether arising at the school or the church or elsewhere, shall be handled as follows. And this is right from the policy. The allegation of child abuse shall be treated seriously and reported to the pastor, head of staff, or another member of the Child Protection Committee. Now, in the case of the weekday school, that would be the weekday school administrator, weekday school director. That would be your key person as weekday school staff to report that to. Certainly, if they were unavailable, there are other people on the church side that you could talk to. But the weekday school director is certainly going to be the person, with the greatest background about, some of the families that might be involved in a situation like this. They're going to know the kids the best. They would be your first point of contact, and the weekday school director will probably want to, talk to other members of that Child Protection Committee, with the senior pastor, with the director of children's ministry, to discuss that. If it's a church family, certainly, we can discuss, if there's been any other signs or similar things or suspicions, of an abusive situation. So how do we report? All Procedures which occur in the handling of the allegation shall be documented from its earliest stage. The burden's not on you. In our situation, we say that we have a designated reporter. So when we say, how do you report? You could call Child Protective Services and make that contact on your own. You can do that anonymously and share what you've seen, and you can kind of take the lead in that process. We assume that you would probably want someone with some experience and has done some even more training and things about how to handle abusive situations, to share that with them, so they can kind of walk with you through that process, to be able to share the information that you've observed, with that next level of support, or even to help determine if the information that you have observed is cause for suspicion, that we would want to make that contact. So our designated reporter, there, all those people that we mentioned that you could report to. For weekday school leaders, it would be the director or administrator of the weekday school. The other members of that committee, so it would be any of our pastors, any of the full-time programmatic staff, including the children's ministry director, the music director, the weekday school director, the youth director, and even moderators and vice moderators of the worship and discipleship council. So certainly, if the weekday school director is not available, any of those people can be contacted, or again, you can go directly, make that report on your own directly to Child Protective Services, if you have great reason for a suspicion. The benefit of our designated reporter situation is that no matter how small a thing you observe, if you don't determine that it's abuse, but might just like to get it off your own conscience, to say that you've shared what you observed to someone else, maybe it seems to be consistent with what a child described, but maybe you just aren't 100% sure, and you just want someone else to help you determine if it's something that should be reported, or you just want someone who interacts with these families on a frequent basis to have knowledge of it as well. Especially it does help, if there are some things that are not cause in themselves to raise enough suspicion that we would report. But that is certainly, if there are a few very small things, it might increase the likelihood of, believing that there, and having a suspicion that there is truly an abusive or neglectful situation. So it helps us, recognize patterns. We ask that you don't keep any information like that to yourself. Talk to that lead staff person, or the pastor or other program staff about what you've observed. They will help, in conjunction with you and others on the Child Protection Committee, decide if action is required. The second phase of our training is really about our procedures, and we say that our procedures are in place to reduce the risk of abuse or neglect occurring as part of our program. We are very selective in who we have work with young people, both on the church side as volunteers, certainly on the staff side of the church and the weekday school. We want to make sure that people are appropriately screened. So to be an approved leader, we say that one of the screening process things is that you consent to, signing off that you have no prior convictions, or that you detail those out, and what those would be. We ask that you be trained. We ask that you submit to a background check. And that's not just at the beginning of your employment, but if you are employed for greater than 5 years, at the 5-year mark, you submit to a new background check. So those are all ways that we just make sure that we don't have anyone working with children that maybe shouldn't be. Also, along with, some of our leader screening, we asked that you be willing to self-report any allegations made against you. Report that to the weekday school administrator or head of staff immediately. And so that might be, what that might look like is that, say you volunteer somewhere, at your child's school or whatever, an accusation is made, perhaps totally unfounded, but that you share that information with the weekday school, with the church, and ensure that they have knowledge of that. We certainly would want to walk through that process with you and support you and be a reference for you. But we also reserve the right to ask you to step down during that time, if that's deemed necessary, as things can be sorted out. So the key rule in working with young people is the 2-person rule. And this is actually a great requirement, but it is not, there is an exception for weekday school leaders because there is a staff exemption. And certainly, as weekday school leaders, there are times that one, leader needs to go and get supplies while the other leader remains in the classroom, with, as half the class needs to go to the bathroom. There are times whenever you are the sole adult with a small group of children. We recognize that sometimes that needs to be the case, but we ask that you make every effort to always have 2. And so that is for the protection of the kids, not wanting ever there to be a situation where, a child is injured, and there's not an adult close by to be able to come in, and be supportive in an accident type situation. It's also to protect you. If a child goes home and says that a weekday school teacher hurt them or hit them or abused them in some way in their own language to their, parent or family, and that parent, comes in and says, well, what is happening? Why has my child said this? And you have a partner that was with you all day. Your partner can support you and say, what the true story was. If there are times whenever you are by yourself, that partner can't do that for you. And so as we protect ourselves, we're always wanting to, have somebody on the floor with us, especially, or somebody that's, maybe kind of floating. Not wanting to be in situations, except when absolutely necessary, where we are by ourselves with a group of children. The other key procedure that we have, so the first being, our 2-leader rule, the second would be open classrooms. And so we say, this is both, a figurative rule of being open figuratively, and also a literal rule, of physically being open classrooms. And so many of every door, that on a classroom that, children will be in has a window, that many of which have been cut out, especially because they are classrooms that maybe weren't there previously, to ensure that people can see in, that everything that we do is out in the open, is not hidden. I mean, sometimes certainly it's helpful to have the door closed for, volume or, to not be distracted by things happening in the hallway. But we want parents to be able to recognize and see what's, happening in the classroom and never feel like they're shut out, from what's happening with their child. When we say that they can make, brief observations with those windows, they're, certainly able to kind of stand at the door and, peek in and see, kind of what, what's happening in the classroom. So physically and open, but also figuratively open, and that we want to create an environment where parents never feel excluded from our classrooms or from the learning environment. Our policies apply to not just the church ministries, not just the weekday school ministries, but any group that uses our church and works with children. So that is a key requirement. And so this applies to our scouting groups, to other churches that have used our playground, even youth groups that stay for a night in the summer. They all sign off on this policy. It's certainly a ministry of ours to ensure that anyone using our building working with kids is upholding practices that ensure safety of children. Every classroom at the First Presbyterian Weekday School has a safe place that students can use. But we thank you for making our entire school a safe place where kids can come and know that they'll be loved and taken care of we appreciate your role in creating that wonderful, safe environment for children and for their families. You have successfully completed the training for First Presbyterian weekday school leaders for safe sanctuaries or child protection. We thank you for doing that. Your requirement now is just to let the person who asked you to complete this training know that you have completed it. If you haven't already, you'll be asked to submit to a background check that will be run and part of your employment with the school. If you have any questions, feel free to ask the Children's Ministry Director or the Weekday School Director or our business manager who helps with some of our safe sanctuaries tracking information. Thank you very much.